Hello, welcome to Ray-ality TV. I'm Raymond Bakari. Today I'm joined by Ryan Lukowicz. Ryan is a high school student. He wants to become a meteorologist. He has a great podcast that you can listen to on all the podcast platforms like Spotify, Apple. You can also follow him on Twitter. I'll link all that in the description. And aside from the podcast he hosts called Behind the Weather Forecast, he also hosts the Rhode Island Democratic Party's podcast. They do weekly interviews with Democratic elected officials. He's interviewed a wide range of elected officials, fellow journalists, meteorologists. I was even on his podcast this past like fall/summer. And Ryan and I are both very interested in politics. We've been following 2022 closely. So this episode is going to be a little bit different than a traditional Q&A. We'll be doing an overview of the 2022 election cycle here in our home state of Rhode Island. Quite a long introduction, but Ryan, how are you today?
I'm doing great. Thank you for all that, Raymond. And I'll tell you, it's tough to pick between weather and politics and journalism. I love them all, and I'm happy to join you today to discuss such an important topic that has really kept a lot of people like us very curious over these past several months, and it's not over.
Absolutely. We still got quite a long time before the September primary and then even longer before the November general election. And it's great to have you on. I think starting off, so just for those watching, for reference, September 13th is the statewide primary. Election day is November 8th. Some of the key offices that we're going to focus on, you have the mayor of Providence, term limited. Mayor Loiza served his 2 4-year terms, so now there's going to be a new mayor. There's statewide offices like Secretary of State, Attorney General, and Treasurer that have no incumbent on the ballot due to term limits. And then obviously governor, lieutenant governor, all the General Assembly races, and even some other mayoral elections like Johnston that are term limited. But starting off with the big one, the governor's race, Ryan, I'll let you start off. Do you want to talk about the Democratic side first?
Absolutely. I think the Democratic side is a lot more interesting, with all due respect, than the Republican side at this point. And it's 5 candidates, of course: Governor McKee, Secretary Gorbea, Matt Brown, Dr. Munoz, and Helena Foulkes. And they are all Democrats throughout the spectrum. And, we've seen a lot of divide within the Democratic Party here. And I think the million-dollar question is, how left do these candidates want to get, and how do they differentiate themselves from each other? We know McKee is more conservative, and we know probably Brown and Munoz are the most progressive. But I guess the question that voters are going to have to deal with is, what issues matter to them, which make these candidates stand out, and how are people going to judge the candidates? Because I've talked to a lot of people who are still undecided, including myself. I like some of them. I have mixed feelings personally, but regardless, McKee is definitely, now that we have an incumbent, of course, he became governor last year. That'll be really interesting. And I think he has the benefit being in office because he's on TV all the time. So, it'll be a challenge for all the other candidates to stay relevant. What are your thoughts, though?
Well, you hit all the nails on the head with that one. I want to look in some of the key issues because 2022, like 2020 and probably like 2024 and all the future elections for the near future will be, COVID's going to be the biggest issue. You have to focus on rebuilding the economy. Vaccine and mask mandates are also going to be an issue. That's more of like a general election than a Democratic primary. Then you have the other ones. Some of these, both you and I have covered when we've interviewed these candidates, like the car tax. It's in its final years. Is that going to be gone for once and for all? The last time we were this close, Governor Kucheri kicked it back into gear, saying we couldn't afford it. You have tolls, truck tolls. Could it go to cars? Technically, it's written like it shouldn't be, but if General Assembly is desperate enough, they might end up moving it. That's not guaranteed, though. Housing, the state is in a housing crisis right now. Legalizing marijuana, that's more of a when and not a if, but the way it's going to be done is going to be interesting. Taking a serious look at Leobor, I know you've covered this a few times when you've had prominent Democratic officials on, like the Senate president and the speaker and the governor. And then for the favorites right now, I still think it's anybody's primary, but the top 2 right now, or top 3, I could say, are Governor McKee, Secretary Gorbea, and then Helena Foulkes. Magaziner was up there when he was still running, but him going to CD2 gives a candidate like Secretary Gorbea more leeway to get more votes. Foulkes has been raising a lot of money, which is key in getting name recognition. But like you mentioned, the governor has an advantage as the incumbent and being on TV all the time. So we'll just have to see. I kind of want to move to the Republican one for a second before we go to the next office. Ashley Kalus is looking at the option she's filed. And then maybe David Darlington's going to run. I know he's signaled interest, but hasn't formally launched or taken up media yet. And then Mayor of Cranston, Ken Hopkins, is still exploring the option. So we're going to have to see what happens with that primary there. Whoever announces first and is actually launches a formidable campaign and goes 100% into it will most likely have a easy primary and can campaign as a general. Any closing thoughts before we move on to the next one?
Yeah, I always have a thought, Raymond. I don't want to move too quickly away from the Democrats because I think you bring up some really interesting issues, and again, it's up to voters to decide what matters to them. But I will say, it seems like because of the surplus in the budget, the car tax is sort of a hard no from most right now. As far as I know, I can't say I've asked every candidate directly. It seems like marijuana is going to come up, sooner than later. Who knows? That could be passed and in effect before, this fall when the candidates are debating, and we'll see. I think the bigger question for the next governor will be, how does that get regulated? So that's not my area of expertise, but we'll see how everything happens. As far as the Republicans, though, I don't think there's a lot to talk about. We really don't have any official candidate for this race. And, if I were Susie Yankee right now, I would be calling Alan Fung or Jessica De La Cruz to tell them, hey, you guys don't have to run against each other for Congress. One of you can run for governor. I think that would make more sense instead of having a three-way Republican primary, which I know we'll get to in the congressional race.
I was under the impression that it was going to be House Minority Leader Blake Filippi for the longest time. His name was always on those hypothetical lists on Go Local Prov articles, and he was the prominent voice. He was bringing up issues like school choice with this caucus, and the lawsuit with the JCLS, and just bringing attention to these issues. And now he's been a top voice for them, and he fits that the description of a moderate, pragmatic Republican that polls well in this state, and a lot of people in the Republican circles give him a favorable view. But like you said, it could be possible we could see one of the candidates from Congressional District 2 flip over. I don't think that's likely now because we're 7 months away from a primary. So it's kind of like whatever you're running for, you got to kind of stick with it at this point. And just going on one last thing with the governor, I want to go to a point you mentioned earlier. With the Democratic primary, I'm noticing a big factionalization. You have your progressive wing with Dr. Luis Daniel Munoz and Matt Brown, and then that's even branched off into the Democratic Socialists of America, like the DSA and the Political Co-op. And then you have Democrats who lean progressive too, but aren't affiliated with them, like Secretary Gobea. And then you have your centrists like Governor McKee and Helena Foulkes. It's going to be interesting, to say the least.
It's weird. Yeah, it's and I do think that causes issues for Democrats locally, and I know we're not talking about it, but nationally too, because you have the squad with the AOCs trying to, sort of fight the establishment Democrats, such as Speaker Pelosi and others in leadership. And it really presents an interesting issue. And don't get me wrong, the Republicans have their issues too. And we know they're divided even after last week with the whole thing about censuring those to national officials. But regardless, I think Republicans, it's a good year for them nationally. Governor's race, I doubt it, but a lot of Democrats, we'll see how they all can make themselves stand out and unique throughout these next several months, because none of them have really done that so far for me to this point. I don't know about you.
Well, I don't have the ability, unfortunately, to give a full-fledged opinion. I always try my best to stay down the line and neutral with this. But a point that you brought up with this looking like a good year for Republicans, Congressional District 2 seems to be that opportunity where the benefit of having a good national environment in a midterm year could see a positive for that party and a potential flip. Congressman Langevin, he retired. very surprisingly, in a very surprising way, like no, I don't think anybody knew that he was going to retire. I was going into a Zoom call with somebody talking about a candidate forum that I'm hosting in March, and next thing you know, I see on Twitter, boom, Congressman Landry retires. I was like, oh, that just shook up the whole race, and
It
we're
was
seeing that. Democrats is like 5 Democrats running. Since we started with the Democrats, let's start off with the Republicans for this one. What are your thoughts on the primary for the GOP side?
it's going to be it's really weird. Bob Lancia has been in this before Jim Langevin even retired. And by the way, credit to Congressman Langevin for decades of public service. I met him a couple of times. He seemed to be a very nice guy. So we can't just gloss over that. But
Yep.
he has certainly caused for a lot of ruckus here with all these candidates announcing, and rather quickly too. I mean, they had to decide within a few weeks. But I think Jess De La Cruz, Senator De La Cruz, and former Mayor Alan Fung, have a really good shot at this. And De La Cruz is a bit more conservative, but I think she's younger. She may appeal to some of those independent voters who are looking for a bit of a change. How I wonder who Sue Cienki and the Republicans are going to support, because I've heard Sue and her counterparts talk about all three of these candidates. I know there were some issues with the state party and the Fungs because of, I don't know, Barbara Ann didn't support Sue at the time. I remember that was a big story, I think back
Right.
like 3 years ago. So I'm kind of curious to see who the party supports. Otherwise, I think you're going to see Fung take the more moderate approach, De La Cruz more conservative. I don't know necessarily where Lancia fits in. Again, I think they have a good shot. Democrats can't take this one for granted, and one of them should just switch into the governor's race. I think that'd be better for their party in general. But do you have any insight on who other Republicans are supporting at this point? Because that's something I know you talked to Sue.
Yeah, so it looks like it's going to be a top two choice between De La Cruz and Mayor Fung, like you had mentioned. I also heard, and Bill Bartholomew talked about this a little bit, that State Rep Patricia Morgan's looking at a bid too. I don't know how likely it is that she jumps in, but if she jumps in, that splits the whole more conservative side of the vote in like 3 directions, as opposed to just one direction for the moderate side with Mayor Fung. Right now, this is going to be I consider this a toss up in the Republican primary, because there's a case for both Senator De La Cruz and Mayor Fung. It's certainly going to be a nationalized race. You have issues like the Build Back Better plan on the Democrat side supporting HR1. Then for Republicans, you like trying to make that case to combat the inflation. They're going to talk about issues like Ukraine, talking about the economy, gas prices going up. But then, interestingly enough, and this has been a point that's been brought up by many local analysts and journalists, Mayor Fung is going to have a tough time because he might get pulled further to the right in the primary. But then when it comes to the general, the Democrats and magaziners already going with this are going to try to connect him to Trump and saying that Mayor Fung would be a vote for Speaker Kevin McCarthy. Kind of like what happened to Senator Lincoln Chafee in 2006 when the Senate balance was in play, just like the House will be in 2022. So it's going to be challenging. Fung right now, he's branding himself as a centrist. He's using the color purple in the campaign ad material. And he could, but also on the contrary, he could drive up the turnout in Cranston. He's very popular in Cranston, as we've seen where he helped propel his wife, Barbara Ann Fenton Fung, to beat the speaker in Cranston. And when Stephen Frias couldn't do that in 2016, a very Republican favorable year. So it's certainly going to be an interesting race. For the Democrat side, you have Ed Pacheco, former state Democratic Party chair and state rep of District 47. He was also working for Rick as the interim executive director of external relations and communications. Dr. Omar Ba, founder of the Refugee Dream Center, treasurer magaziner, and then Joy Fox, former Raimondo and Langevin staffer. Those are the declared right now. Oh, and Michael Neary as well. He's a former national political strategist, worked for a 2016 John Kasich campaign nationally. And I want to get your thoughts on that part of the primary, the Democratic side.
So I think Treasurer Magaziner is probably the front runner right now, probably just because of his name recognition, and I think people knew him across the state. But I do think there are some of his supporters that have sort of lost some respect or trust in him after he sort of switched out. And I think there will be some questions raised about, were you really supportive of the governor's race? And are you doing this just because of pressure from the state party? We'll see. I don't know how much that'll impact him, but Ed Pacheco is also a strong candidate, has a lot of experience both in politics, but also, running something like Rick and doing an important work there. So, I talked to Treasurer Magaziner last week. He is very much focused on what you mentioned, support me because I won't support McCarthy or Trump. But we'll see how Pacheco and him kind of differentiate themselves. They both appear to be moderates. I'm having Pacheco on my podcast in a couple of weeks.
Awesome.
So that'll be, that's one of the questions I plan to ask is, hey, Treasurer Magaziner, he might be the front runner. What happens, and how do you sort of stand out? Again, it's this whole thing about standing out and differentiating yourself. That's like the two phrases here of this whole interview, if you remember anything. Otherwise, Joy Fox, Michael Neary, I don't know a lot about them. Never heard them really in like an extended interview. I'll do some research on my end to see if I can get them on my podcast. Omar Vaz, an interesting guy. Of course, he has, the struggle of name recognition, but I appreciate his perspective and sort of where he comes from on issues. So again, it's not a clear cut primary. So both sides of this race, the Democratic and the Republican primaries, will be something to watch and very juicy. Do you have any predictions about
predictions?
Yeah, Magaziner.
Maybe let's go with this is tough. I don't want to just say one because also I've interviewed a few of them, and I feel like that would be unfair of myself to say. It's certainly, like you had mentioned, the Democratic side. It definitely seems like the top two between Ed Pacheco and Treasurer Magaziner. Joy Fox came out recently with a strong announcement video. And she has ties. She worked for Langevin and Raimondo. She also, I believe, she worked for Channel 10. And I'm going to also bring up the Rick connections because there's quite a few because I wanted to tie that in a second. But to your point, Ed Pacheco, he also has a lot of strong endorsements. Former Mayor of Providence, Angel Tavares, he's their honorary chairperson for the campaign. Representative Grace Diaz, he's got a long list of endorsements already racked up right when he announced those. It was like 2 or 3 pages. So that's going to be certainly interesting to see how it's going to go between Pacheco and Magaziner, like as the clear top two right now. It could fluctuate. There's even another candidate. I forget her name. I know her mom had ran against Claudine Schneider in the late 80s. I forget her name. It's Sarah. I forget how to pronounce the last name. She bought a couple of domains recently.
Yes, I read that this morning, how she was looking into a run as well. And I think she's actually from my hometown of North Kingstown, which is kind of cool. So that was interesting. It's still too early to see if she's actually going to run and what her effect is. And again, it's the whole name recognition thing, because I know she is working for the Biden administration, I believe under Governor or former Governor, now Commerce Secretary Raimondo. So
yep, she's I forget her title, but I think she was like a deputy secretary, or she works in the commerce for the Secretary of Commerce. I do want to point out the Rick connections real quick because that's where I currently attend. That's why I'm wearing the Rick hoodie for those watching. So the incumbent, Congressman Langevin, Rick alum, he's retired. On the Republican side, you have 2 Rick alums, Rep. Lancia and Mayor Alan Fung. On the Democratic side, Ed Pacheco, he recently was working for Rick, and he did a lot of fundraising for the school too over the past few years, and worked as the executive director of external relations and communications. And this one I found out recently because I reached out to Joy Fox for an interview, and that's coming up in the coming month. She worked for the Anchor, which is currently where I'm the news editor for the school paper. She was a reporter and copy editor, which I found to be very interesting, and that's something I look forward to asking about when that interview comes to be. I just wanted to point that out. And one more point for the Republican side. I believe if Mayor Fung or even if Senator De La Cruz is the nominee, the NRCC are definitely going to funnel in money to this. This might be like the Oklahoma 5th district for 2022, which that was like a swing district that was reliably Republican but flipped Democrat in 2018. So I can easily see this district being something like that. I'm just going to gloss over District 1 real quick. Alan Waters, he's the Republican running the one of the only two declared Republicans, because the other one is a perennial candidate named Frederick Wysocki. He's running for the third time now. Doesn't really win in the primaries and ran as an independent against Cicilline. Alan Waters, he was the 2020 Republican nominee versus Senator Reed. He's running on a bunch of these nationalized issues. He wants to pass something called the Fair Tax Act, which would get rid of all like the income tax and just have a national sales tax on new goods and services. He's facing an uphill battle is the best way to say it versus Congressman Cicilline. I don't know if there's anything else you want to add for Congressional District 1 on that.
It's just such a blue district, and there are so many Democrats who live there that it's really the bluer section of the state, if you will. And again, the reason we're talking so much about CD2 is because it is truly a purple district. It's a very moderate, right? You have a lot of Democrats, a lot of Republicans. So yeah, I give Alan Waters and Frederick Wysocki and whoever other Republicans want to jump in a lot of credit, because it's going to be hard. And Cicilline sort of established himself within Democratic circles on a national level. So yeah, it's reasonable to say Cicilline will probably have another term.
He might end up being in a leadership position, because what I'm hearing is that if the House flips red, and this is common knowledge, most likely that Speaker Pelosi might retire. She's getting up there in age, and I don't think she wants to be House Minority Leader again. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see Congressman Cicilline's name in contention for House Minority Leader, maybe whatever leadership position. Maybe Hakeem Jeffries of New York, he's a congressman there. Those are two names I'm hearing as a potential. Looking at Secretary of State real quick, because there's only one declared candidate. State Rep Greg Amore, he's announced he's raised a hundred and something thousand in this past quarter. He's a formidable candidate on the Democratic side. There's a possibility Elizabeth Tanner, Director of Rhode Island Department of Business Regulation, may step in. And Providence City Council President John Igliozzi, he's said he's eyeing statewide office, and the only two options I could see that would make sense in his case would either be Secretary of State or Treasurer, or he just goes back to the private sector. Any thoughts on the Democratic side for Secretary of State?
I heard John Igliozzi and Ramon Perez were going to switch jobs at some point last year. I don't know if that's like a rumor. We'll see. John Igliozzi, though, I mean, he's a city council president now, and he's certainly, I think, somewhat conservative. I don't know the details on his district, but we know Providence he's a Democrat, don't get me wrong, but Providence is more liberal than a lot of other places around the state. You get what I'm trying to say. But in terms of the Secretary of State's race, I think Greg Amore, I mean, he seems like such a strong candidate. I mean, he's taught history at East Providence High School. Everybody I've talked to just seems to really like him and enjoy him. So who knows that one? I mean, I know the Republicans are very passionate about these voting issues, so they should put up a candidate for Secretary of State. I don't know a lot about that, but Amore, I don't think he'll have a primary. That's just my hot take. We'll see, but he seems to have a lot of support. Unlike a lot of these other races, from the entire sector of the Democratic Party, if you will.
Yeah, he's facing a potential unopposed primary, which I thought was interesting, because if you asked me like 6 to 7 months ago, I thought maybe former Central Falls Mayor James Diosa might have stepped in. I was thinking Liz Tanner was another Democrat. I thought Gail Golden, former state senator, she works for the Biden administration. She was eyeing that, so I thought that was going to be a competitive primary, and it most likely was going to be. But once she got that job, she's in Washington now, so now that opened up the field for Rep. Amore. Right. Yeah, and echoing what you said, I see big issues being the voting laws. voter ID. On the GOP side, they're going to talk about election integrity, keeping the voter ID laws. You see more progressives wanting to repeal it. Rep. Amore has said on my show, that he doesn't see it as being a restrictive voter ID law the way we have in Rhode Island, and he hasn't seen any data that it's restricted people from voting. But that's going to be an interesting dialogue. But also, Secretary of State's office does more than just elections. They help out small businesses, promoting civic engagement, which is another strength of Rep. Amore's because he was a history teacher, like you had mentioned. And other than that, the only Republican I know of that might be running, and for the record, GOP Chairwoman Sue Cienki, she told me when I had her on recently that there were a few candidates eyeing it, but very early stages in that conversation. Pat Cortellessa, are you familiar with him running when he ran in 2018?
No, I enlighten me.
Yeah, so he I believe he worked for Mayor Cianci. He was doing something in Providence years ago, but in 2018 he ran for the office, got 32% of the vote in a losing effort versus Nelly Gorbea. He then ran in 2020 for State Senate District 27, got about 39% of the vote. The vote was also split with an independent. He lost to Hannah Gallo, who was the incumbent. He's looking at another run, to my understanding. He talked about it, I quote tweeted, and then now he's like direct messaging me like updates of his campaign platform, and like he showed his website that's in the works. So that's the only Republican I can think of right now. I thought, and I'm thinking about this, and if there's a statewide office and that they need a Republican candidate, Cranston City Council President Chris Papalauskis, he's term limited after this time. I think he only has one more term because it's 5 consecutive 2-year terms in Cranston. He might be a formidable candidate if you run him statewide or even for like a General Assembly seat.
Definitely, yeah. I'm not too familiar with him, but Cranston is very loyal, and it seems like people like Mayor Fong and Mayor Hopkins have done a good job over there. So we'll see. I think the bigger question for Republicans in general is, do these people like Leader Filippi and even like Whip Chippendales, Senator De La Cruz, even like David Place, Brian Newberry, do they take the risk of losing their House seats to run for these higher offices that would make a bigger impact and keep it competitive? Now, my theory on that is they're already in the minority. What is, one less House seat gonna really do? And it's an interesting topic to bring up. But in terms of Secretary of State, yeah, it seems like Greg Amore and that's it for the most part.
Yeah, which I found to be interesting because I thought the primary would have had a couple more Democrats because it's an office that it's more of like an administrative office. You have like important roles, but it does gear you up for a run for governor down the line, like after you're term limited for 8 years. It is a very important office though, and Secretary Gorbea has done a great job of making civic engagement, education very important, and she's utilized the role of Secretary of State to do a lot of great things for the state. Looking at General Treasurer right now, like Secretary of State, only one Democrat announced. Former Mayor of Central Falls, James Diosa. Any thoughts on where that race could be heading? Especially now that Fung made the jump to CD2, he was looking at treasurers from what I heard last time.
Yeah, I don't know a lot about the Republican side and if there are any candidates thinking about it, but I am surprised there's only one Democrat. I think more for treasurer even than Secretary of State, because you had heard rumors of Marvin Abney and Ryan Pearson and these prominent Democrats who were, on finance committees in both of those cases. Abney and Pearson, it was the chairman of the House and Senate finance committees respectively. But you had heard their names a ton. I think anyone on either finance committee, there's a chance that they had been talked about. But and it makes sense, of course, because finance committee, money, treasurer, that's how it is. But I don't know. People again, from what I've heard and from who I talked to, are not as satisfied with James Diosa as they may have been with Greg Amore. So it wouldn't surprise me if another Democrat or two jumped in, especially one of those legislators. So we'll see. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, like you, I'm surprised too. I think Rep. Abney hasn't ruled it out. Same with Senator Pearson. But you think now would be the time to jump in because there's only if we're in February, so you
Yeah,
have like
can't do
seven
it late.
seven months to do a primary. You can't jump in late. Really, realistically, and I've said this time and time again, especially when I was concerned when the Republicans couldn't find a gubernatorial candidate. Realistically, if you want to run a statewide office, even if you're just a state senator or a state rep or a former mayor, you have to start like a year out, like no
Mm,
later than October, November, because then you have the holidays and then winter. It's tough to go knock on doors during winter. I mean, it's snowing outside. But honestly, I'm surprised for the Democratic primary. The Republican primary, it was expected to be Mayor Fung, but he's running for Congress, so it's to be seen who's going to run for that. That shook up a little bit of things, but it might not be an office that the party's prioritizing, considering that it's more likely they could flip CD2 than win statewide for
yeah,
treasurer, which makes
I,
sense. A couple of key issues, just basically financial issues facing the state, like the Providence pension system, for example, because that's a big one. If the city goes and the state's going to suffer, that's probably going to be one of the key issues in that race. Looking at,
yeah,
sorry.
I, or maybe just the state's uh, financial status as a whole. We saw that with the whole pension thing years ago, and credit to Treasurer Magaziner. I do think, regardless of what you think of him politically, he's done a lot with the office, including the school construction thing. So it's another office where you can do a lot with, and I guess we'll see what candidates have to offer. Again, it's just former Mayor Dios at this point, but uh, time will tell if anybody else jumps in. But I agree, they should do it sooner than later because it's going to be tough if they announce months down the line.
Exactly, and I believe Mayor Diosa just recently got endorsed by former Mayor of Providence Angel Tavares too, so that's a powerful endorsement. He's most likely going to get endorsed maybe from the current mayor of Central Falls, Maria Rivera. It's going to be an interesting primary. Technically, as of right now, he's the favorite because there's nobody else running. Looking at Lieutenant Governor, that's an interesting primary in itself. You have Lieutenant Governor Sabina Matos, the incumbent, is being primaried by Senator Cynthia Mendez, who's running alongside Matt Brown and kind of like a dual effort for governor and lieutenant governor. And Mendez is part of that slate of 50, an expected 50 Rhode Island political cooperative candidates who are running on a very progressive platform all across the state.
Uh-huh.
What are your thoughts on that primary?
I don't know, 50 candidates. I don't. They're not 50 on their website. I hope more announced, but with all due respect to Matt Brown and the rest of their crew, I don't know how. I appreciate their message and their platform, and I agree with a little bit of what they say, but I think it's going to be tough for them to take over the effing state house if they want to. But anyway, putting that aside, Cynthia Mendez, listen, she's going to give Sabina Matos a run for her money.
Oh,
I
absolutely.
I mean, listen, Lieutenant Governor Matos, I get it. She has only been in not even a year at this point, but has she done a lot that's really going to, that Rhode Islanders know about? I guess she's probably worked a lot behind the scenes with the governor and all that jazz. But Cynthia Mendez has definitely passionate, and I think she's going to get a lot of progressives out to the polls. Her and many others in the co-op. So all the credit to them there. But I don't know. It's just what is Lieutenant Governor Matos running on? And also on the Republican side, Paul Pence. I know you interviewed him. I haven't had a chance to listen to
Yep.
that yet, but as far as I know, he's kept a lower profile. So um, we'll see. I mean, the question is how left is the state going, and does Cynthia Mendez have a chance as a younger female progressive to run and win against a weaker establishment Democrat, if you will, just because she's only been in the job, what is it, 10 or 11 months now.
Yep.
And it's I was excited for her last year when she came in. I thought she was really good, but I mean, I don't know. It's tough for a lieutenant governor in general to do a lot because they're essentially powerless. So This will be, I think, more interesting than people think and realize. And I've also, Raymond, heard a lot of people who may not like Matt Brown as much, but like Cynthia Mendez. So she's definitely more supported. But anyway, go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No problem. Absolutely. It's certainly an underrated race is the best way to put it. Imagine if in a world where you see Senator Mendez get elected and then Governor McKee reelected, that dynamic alone would be so interesting. But yeah, it's certain she's certainly going to give the lieutenant governor a run for her money. The office is more of like an advocacy. They fill up a few councils that they have to serve on that focus on small businesses and whatnot. But honestly, the question is Lieutenant Governor Matos considered progressive enough to those progressives that are going to eye a candidate and vote for a candidate like Cynthia Mendez is the real question. And then touching upon what you said for the Republican side, aside from Paul Pence, he's an engineer, was the GOP nominee versus McKee in 2018. He's also got a primary on his hands. He's going to be running against John Lugo, who's a Providence police officer. He's formally announcing soon in like another week or so. I'm currently in the process of getting that interview set up for the show. But other than that, that's also going to be an interesting primary. John Lugo is going to give Paul Pence a run for his money in the primary. And if he's elected in the primary, he could potentially give a competitive election on the general election side versus maybe Senator Mendez. Imagine if she upsets Lieutenant Governor Matos, there's no incumbent. So it's kind of like Congressional District 2 all over again. Key issues I could see: education. Lieutenant Governor Matos and Governor McKee, they're in favor of things like charter schools, helping out small businesses, and also just whatever issues that they would like to bring attention to. I know Senator Mendez is running on this very progressive platform with Matt Brown, so that alone, she's running on like the same platform as Matt Brown for governor. The other statewide office I do have on here is a Attorney General. Do you want to start for the Attorney General, like whether it's a Democrat or Republican side? There's only like one for each.
I know. I'll just wrap up Lieutenant Governor quickly and say, again, underrated, probably, not that important in the grand scheme of things. And I will say, I listened to Cynthia Mendez on a podcast last week, and it was very interesting hearing her talk about what would happen if McKee and her, serve together. And yeah, it's definitely a possibility. Attorney General is probably the most interesting statewide office for Republicans because of their candidate, Charles Calenda.
Yep.
I think a lot of more people than thought may oppose this lifespan Stanny merger. We'll see what happens with that. I do think that could become a key issue in a lot of these races. It's just a matter of watching and waiting to tell what ends up happening there. But Calenda, to his credit, is somebody who got going early, has been very active on Twitter, and really sort of holding Nerona accountable in terms of everything he does. But it's another case of, if you're a Democrat, which a lot of the state is, you're probably going to vote for Nerona. If you're a Republican, Calenda, of course, is, who you'll likely be, marking that ballot for. But primaries, I don't see it likely. A lot of Democrats seem to like Nerona. He seems to be liked throughout the spectrum of the party. And Calenda has gotten a lot of support from all Republicans as well. So I think it's just, this one is probably going to be one of the most interesting general elections, I guess, but probably no primary.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. I could see key issues on Calenda's side, talking about things like combating critical race theory, which is a key issue Republicans have been focusing on nationally, and the vaccine and mask mandates. We've seen that play an interesting role in Virginia, where there was a clean sweep for their GOP. They won their governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, and the state house elections. So, not saying that Rhode Island is going to flip like that, because Rhode Island is, looking at it statistically, more blue than Virginia. Virginia is like a +10 Democrat, while Rhode Island's more like a +20 Democratic state. But it's going to be an interesting, like you said, it's going to be an interesting general election, to say the least. Going to Providence mayoral election, no Republican's going to run, and the likelihood of an independent, like someone who could fundraise like $500,000 like that, like Dying Women did in 2018. Not going to happen. But the Democratic primary, it's like the New York City one. It's going to be a de facto mayoral election in September. 4 declared candidates: Gonzalo Cuervo, he was Deputy Secretary of State, worked for Mayor Cicilline and Tavares years ago in a number of roles. Brett Smiley, he was Director of Administration, then Governor Raimoto's Chief of Staff. He was also Chief Operating Officer in the city for a few years when Elorza was first elected. Ward 3 City Councilwoman Yerva LaFortune, she's running as well, and former City Council President Michael Solomon. Solomon and Smiley ran in a primary before in 2014 on the Democratic side. Solomon came close, doing really well in areas like South Providence. He also has a war chest of $250,000, but he's also been campaigning quietly. Like the first interview I've seen him was recently on Community Focus. Any thoughts on the Democratic primary?
Yeah, I heard him say during Community Focus that he sort of is starting out slow, but will get more build more momentum, I guess, in the coming months. But yeah, I haven't seen too much from him. I had said to you before we started, like, just as a disclaimer, I don't know a ton about the race, and I think the big question is, again, I don't mean to sound like a broken record, but differentiating themselves and making the 4 of them stand out, and who's going to appeal to the conservatives, the moderates, the progressives, who's liberal, who's this. It's a lot of labels, unfortunately, in general, but I mean, I follow them all on Twitter. I'll probably have them on my podcast at some point. Because I think it's a fun race to watch, but they all look very active. They seem to all love Providence. So I know there are concerns with Smiley, being established, and he may take the more conservative to moderate voters. And I know there's controversy about him and the Raimondo administration, and the whole thing with financial donations, whatever. You probably know more about that than I do. But either way, it's any of these candidates' race to win right now, and who knows how much that thing will actually impact Smiley, and if people even remember it. But LaFortune, Cuervo, Solomon, Smiley, I mean, they all appear strong. They don't really have a lot of baggage, and they all seem to care about Providence. And I think key issues, there's really 3: public safety, the economy, and education. But they're all Democrats. They must have similar opinions on those issues. I think that maybe one of the things they'll disagree on is the police, and what do they think of how they're doing, and do you give them more money, less money? Do you do more things with mental health resources? I know that's been a bigger conversation nationally, and I think it's going to apply to Providence in this election. So I would argue that's maybe the most important issue. I don't know what you think on the candidates and what they'll be passionate about, but that's just my opinion. Who am I?
You did say the top 3 issues that I had written down here. Focusing on the economy a little bit, the pension system, that's a big one. It's like a ticking time bomb, and I always say this because it is true. If that pension system keeps going in the hole, the city could end up going into bankruptcy, and then even a potential receivership, kind of like what happened with Central Falls years ago. It's honestly a consequential mayoral election. This is the first time there's going to be no incumbent on the ballot in 8 years. You have Gonzalo Cuervo. He's gonna get a large part of the Hispanic vote, especially now that Lieutenant Governor Matos, then Council President Matos became Lieutenant Governor. Then you also have the East Side vote between Smiley and LaFortune, because LaFortune represents Ward 3, which is on the East Side. That's another question of how the East Side vote's going to split. As well as then Michael Solomon, he's the wild card. He got like 40 something percent of the vote and came really close to beating Elorza in that first primary in 2014 as the council president back then. So he might have a voting base that we're not aware of at this point, because it is also, I should also mention that 2022 is 8 years out from 2014. So voters might know someone like Gonzalo Cuervo who's going to all these events, as opposed to Michael Solomon, who's been kind of campaigning quietly. Yeah, it's gonna be an interesting one. I do want to do a quick side note for the Providence mayoral election, I am co-moderating a candidate forum for this election. That's going to be next month on March 23rd from 12:30 to 2 p.m. It's going to be virtual, and it's a couple Rick student organizations have come together, like our school paper, radio station, political science club, and we can't have it in person, but we're going to live stream and do it over a Zoom call. And I'm going to link a webpage in the description too with more information on that. Is there any other races that we haven't covered that you wanted to shed light on?
Yeah, I think just wrapping up the Providence mayoral stuff, it may be more about what parts of the city is your base versus, what type of voters, politically wise, are you thinking about? Which I guess is just a thing about these city races. It's one gets the south side. That's more important than say one gets the moderate voters. So just an interesting side point there. But I do look forward to the forum. Other races, I don't know. Are there? Here's my question for you. Any legislative races that you think could be interesting? Are there any? I mean, I know that the co-op has a lot of candidates, and the Republicans. I know there are a couple who have announced for GA. Do you know more about that?
Yeah, so I know their District 33, Jessica Drew Day, she's running as a Republican. There's another Republican, I forget I forget his name. I know there's a there's a couple General Assembly elections that I'm trying to think of. Dennis Algier, he has a primary, not a primary, a general election challenger. There's going to be a Democrat. He's one of the co-op candidates is running against Algier. And this is like going to be the first time Algier has had a general election opponent in quite a while. He's ran unopposed in a few of them. Senator De La Cruz, since she's running for Congress, her seat's now open. That's another one. District 16, that's been a close district. I don't know of any Republicans that might run against Rep Potter, but that might be one to look out for because it's been close the past couple election cycles. District 15, I know Rep Fenton Fung has a primary opponent, but she hasn't really started campaigning as much as one would think if you're going to primary the incumbent. Other than that, a lot of the GA races, I mean, most of them do have primary opponents from the co-op, but other than that, I can't really think of specific ones at the moment that might be worth to note because it is quite some time before you have to file paperwork. I was originally under the impression that if Leader Filippi was going to run for governor, that seat was going to be an automatic flip because Block Island is voted for Biden by quite the margin. Other elections, Providence City Council wards 3, 4, 6, 7, and 14 have no incumbent due to term limits. Maybe Ward 10 and 9 too if those incumbents decide not to run, but nothing confirmed yet. Cranston has their city council elections. Chris Papalauskas, I believe, is term limited since this would be his 5th 2-year term. Other than that, locally, I know East Providence has a mayoral election. Bob DeSilva, he's running for a 2nd term. He's their first ever mayor since they recently moved to a mayored council form of government. North Providence Mayor Charles Lombardi probably will run unopposed. Johnston's mayoral election, though. Mayor Policina is term limited. His son, Joseph Policina Jr., he's on the town council. He's going to run for that seat, which I think is interesting. I don't know if there's going to be another Democrat. Have you heard of anything on the Johnston mayoral election side?
I have not. I've been trying to focus on the GA, and yeah, some of the co-op candidates are definitely interesting. They'll give, Clara Harvey. I don't remember if it's Harvey or Hardy, but her first name is Claire. She's running against Arthur Corvasi. I just saw this weekend. His name is escaping me. But Brian Newberry has a challenger. I want to say it's Pat something.
I think it's he's a school committee member, right?
Yes. He just announced week he was going to run. The other one, because there was a special election last year, Senate District 3. I know Gina Pham is running against Sam Syria, but we'll see if anyone else, does gets another chance. Hillary Levy Friedman or Brett Jacob or Ray Rickman. So that'll be one to watch.
That was an interesting primary. I actually didn't think about that. That escaped my mind. And another candidate I forgot her name, Marie Hopkins. She's a Republican. She's running in District 21. I want to say. Let me just pull it up real quick because I don't want to give false information. Marie Hopkins. She is running In District 21, yes, that's a district. That was one of them that the GOP party chair Susinki had told me about when I asked her. There's potential candidates that ran in close elections last time that might run again, like Frank Ritchie, Brian Rea. Those are races to look out for in those General Assembly races. I want to do a wild card real quick before I ask you my final question that takes a step away from the politics. So, there are third parties running for the statewide offices. I just want to do like a quick wild card / a shout out to the third parties because they're always forgotten about, and I've tried my best to get them on. So Ann Armstrong, she was with the Compassion Party. She claims now she's running for something as a Republican, and then former Compassion Party candidate Ray Alberto Herrera, he told me that he was dropping out of the race for governor. But now Ann Armstrong is saying on Twitter that he's running for governor as Republican. So I'm not sure what's going on with that. You might know this candidate, Paul Ryan Jr. He's running as an independent. He's on the more populist / far right pro-Trump ideas like no vaccine mandates, no mask mandates. He's led the anti-vaccine mandate movement sort of throughout protests throughout the city of Providence. They've had quite a few recently. The moderate party, I had the party chair on Bill Gilbert. He told me they will have a candidate. I think it might be Gilbert himself if they don't find one. That's what Bill Bartholomew said on Twitter recently.
Yeah.
Third parties, I should note, in order to get an official party status, you need 5% of the statewide or presidential vote in Rhode Island to get that status. So, for example, the Libertarian Party, they're going to have their April convention for their official candidate. The Green Party, I don't know. I know we have a Rhode Island Green Party. I don't know if that's the same thing as the recently launched Ocean State Green Party. I don't know if you know anything else about that, Ryan, but
don't.
Yeah, and then there's more factualization within the left. Like I consider the Co-op kind of their own party because they're using their own resources and fundraising. Even though they're all running as Democrats, I feel like they're kind of their own faction within that party. The reform. Oh, sorry. What?
No, I just said it depends on how you look at it. You know that
Yeah.
it is an point though, and I give you a lot of credit for really looking into third-party candidates that you know quite more than I do, even about the Ann Armstrong Twitter drama. Good for you.
I've been trying to follow it because I always believe in giving every candidate a fair voice regardless of what party. And my last third party shout out, the Reform Party. They recently started their Rhode Island affiliate. I believe Tony Jones is heavily involved with that. For those watching who may not know who Tony Jones is, he's an on-air DJ. He ran for lieutenant governor as a libertarian in 2014, got about 3% of the vote. And he was also on, I believe, your town's school committee, Ryan, in North Kingston in 2018. I think he might have been appointed, if I recall correctly. But
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it might have been only for a couple of years, like one term, but he was appointed. I don't know if he was elected. I think someone had told me he was appointed. But
yeah,
how that? Oh,
I said I just don't recognize the name, but
yeah, it's possible that he might have got elected too. I tried my best to condense all these notes for the third parties because it's going in like 5 different directions. There's a bunch of third parties, and like the Reform Party came recently, so I had to modify my notes. My final question, with all that information aside, because we kind of made this quite a long one, but I enjoyed this long form conversation because I don't get to talk about politics to this extent with people, and I'm glad we're able to do this, Ryan. I was on your podcast and you asked me like the final word and all the questions that you had asked me about the creation of the show, what got me interested in journalism. One of my questions I want to ask you, and this is my famous last question to end things off, is what do you think Rhode Island is best known for?
You know, I knew you were going to ask that question. It is so hard. I'll take the easy way out and just say calamari because of our reputation with the whole thing at the DNC, and credit to Chairman McNamara for that. That was pretty cool. I know it was a couple of years ago now, but I don't know. It seems like that unites Rhode Islanders, and when people think of our state, they think calamari. So it is quite an enjoyed food, mostly in the summertime. I guess that would be the answer. I know that's kind of an obvious one, but has anybody? That must be a fun question for you to ask. I enjoy those icebreakers. I've been doing favorite Rhode Island restaurant lately.
Yeah, I
Uh,
noticed that because I saw your episode. I've listened to your episode of Governor McKee and the Treasurer recently, and I noticed that you're doing more of the icebreakers, and you do them in the middle too, which I like that dynamic because it cools things down, like the definition icebreaker itself. I like that.
yes, I'll tell you the funnest one was with Secretary Gorbea a couple weeks ago when,
Yep.
of course, from North Kingstown as well, and it went from restaurants, how close we live to them, to what's your favorite ice cream flavor. It was um, credit to her for being very personable. Some people say she's the nicest person in Rhode Island politics. So,
Yeah.
regardless,
I will say that, and for to give credit to all of them, every politician I've interviewed and have met have always been nice and personable to me. Secretary
yeah,
Gorbea, I've met her quite a few times. I've met her at events before. I've met her just like going to the state house and just her being the next person I had walked by, and she's always been like, "Hey, how you doing?" We would talk, and she was very nice. One event that I was at. I was on an event with a friend of mine. We had met her because she was there, and then she was telling everybody, "Hey, this is the kid that won the C-SPAN contest," and I was like, "Oh my god, that's so awesome!" And she remembered, so I thought that was really cool. She's very nice. Um,
yeah.
and I figure instead of just ending it with the Rhode Island best known for, is there any you have like any last word or anything you want to shout out? I'm gonna put all the links to your podcast and the Twitter account in the description.
I appreciate that. We'll just keep to your. I would say just everyone stay civically engaged and learn about the candidates, regardless if it's governor, congressional, local. Ray and I do. I think we both do our best together. We can try to get all the candidates, but it's fun doing this. And as the races progress, hopefully we'll do it again. Maybe we'll do something on my podcast or go back and forth. We'll see, but it's great to talk with you, Raymond. I appreciate you being so involved and passionate, as am I, because I some days I talk to my parents and they're like, "What'd you say? Can you say that slower?" And they're credit to them, they're trying to understand what's going on and follow the races. But anyway, it was a pleasure. I hope people learned something today, and we'll see how things go, and it'll be a fun fall, that's for sure.
Absolutely. I made this joke on one of my content production sheets for the school paper recently. I said that this is like for political junkies like you and I, this is like Christmas and a birthday together for this election cycle.
You're right. It really is.
But yeah, I want to thank you so much for coming on, Ryan, and talking with me about this. I'm really glad to know that there's people in our age group that are interested in politics because
Okay.
I mean, when I was in school, I didn't really get to talk to a lot of people about politics like that, and if I did, they would just roll their eyes like, "Oh, okay, here goes Ray talking about politics again." But yeah, thank you for watching this episode of Ray-ality TV. If you want to see future episodes as soon as they're posted on this channel, please click the subscribe button and the post notification bell icon down below. And if you want to check out Ryan's podcast or follow him on Twitter, I'm also going to tweet this episode out, and I'm going to put his links in the description so you can click those. I encourage you to listen to his podcast because he's also covering 2022, and he's doing a lot of great things with his interviews. And he's also hosting the Democratic Party's podcast. So if you ever want to know more about that side of the Rhode Island political spectrum, the links will be down below in the description. I'm Raymond Bakari, and I'll see you on the next episode.